Hello, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like you to think about something. Imagine standing in a forest early in the morning. The sun is just beginning to rise. A gentle wind moves through the trees. Birds sing somewhere in the distance. Nothing is trying to impress you. Nothing is demanding your attention. And yet, the moment feels beautiful. Perhaps the most beautiful things in life are often quiet. A sunrise, a falling leaf, a peaceful conversation, a warm smile. They do not announce themselves. They do not ask for recognition. They simply exist, and perhaps fluency belongs on that list too. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. When people first begin learning English, they often imagine fluency in a very specific way. They imagine speaking quickly. They imagine knowing thousands of words. They imagine sounding exactly like a native speaker. They imagine confidence that never disappears. And because of these images, fluency can begin to feel distant, almost like a mountain hidden behind the clouds. Something impressive, something difficult, something reserved for other people. But life often teaches a different lesson. Imagine watching two musicians perform. The first musician plays loudly, quickly, with great energy. Every movement seems impressive. Every note demands attention. The audience cannot help but notice. Then a second musician begins to play. The music is softer, simpler, calmer. Nothing feels forced. Nothing feels rushed. And somehow, the room becomes quiet. People listen more carefully, not because the music is louder, but because it feels effortless. There is something beautiful about effortlessness, not because effort is unnecessary, but because effort has become invisible. Perhaps fluency works the same way. Many learners imagine fluency as adding more vocabulary, more grammar, more expressions, more speed. And certainly, these things matter. But perhaps true fluency is not only about adding. Perhaps it is also about becoming comfortable. Comfortable with pauses, comfortable with imperfections, comfortable with uncertainty. Imagine learning how to ride a bicycle. At first, every movement requires attention. You think about balance. You think about steering. You think about the pedals. Nothing feels natural. Everything feels important. But eventually, something changes. The bicycle remains the same. The road remains the same. Yet the experience feels completely different. You stop thinking about riding and simply ride. Perhaps language follows a similar path. At first, English feels like a collection of skills, vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, listening, speaking. Each one feels separate. Each one demands attention. But over time, the pieces begin to come together. And when they do, something remarkable happens. English begins to feel less like a subject and more like a conversation, less like a task and more like a companion. Maybe you've noticed something interesting. The people who seem most fluent are often not the people trying hardest to sound fluent. They are simply present. Present in the conversation, present in the moment, present with the person they are speaking to. Imagine meeting an old friend. You do not spend the entire conversation thinking about how you sound. You do not analyze every sentence. You do not measure every word. You focus on the connection, the story, the laughter, the experience itself. And perhaps this is why truly fluent people often seem calm. Their attention has moved beyond the language. The language is still there. Of course it is. But it no longer sits at the center of everything. A river does not think about flowing. A bird does not think about flying. A tree does not think about growing. These things simply happen, not because they are effortless, But because they have become natural, many people spend years learning this lesson. At first, they believe fluency means speaking perfectly. Then they believe it means speaking quickly. Then they believe it means speaking confidently. And eventually, many discover something surprising. Fluency feels less like performance and more like peace. A quiet confidence, a quiet trust, a quiet understanding that communication does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. Perhaps this is why some learners become frustrated. They spend years chasing an image of fluency that was never entirely true, an image built on perfection, speed, accuracy, constant confidence. But real conversations rarely work that way. Even native speakers pause. Even native speakers search for words. Even native speakers make mistakes. The difference is not perfection. The difference is comfort. Imagine sitting beside a river. The water moves around every rock, not because the rocks disappear, but because the river keeps flowing. Perhaps fluent speakers do the same. A missing word appears. They move around it. A mistake happens. They continue. An awkward sentence appears. They smile and keep talking. The conversation remains alive. The connection remains alive. And maybe that is the true beauty of fluency. Not the absence of mistakes, but the absence of fear. Not the ability to control every word, but the ability to trust the conversation. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust that communication is still possible, even when everything is not perfect. Life has a way of rewarding that trust, slowly, quietly, like a tree growing roots beneath the earth. Most of the change happens where nobody can see it. Day after day, conversation after conversation, story after story, and eventually, the roots become deep enough that the tree no longer fears the wind. And perhaps that is where our story begins to go deeper. Because if fluency is not really about perfection, then what is it truly about? What makes some people appear so comfortable in English? And why does that comfort often seem more powerful than perfect grammar or advanced vocabulary? Perhaps the answer is much quieter than most people expect. Perhaps the answer really is quieter than most people expect. When people imagine fluency, they often imagine something visible, something obvious, something impressive, a large vocabulary, perfect pronunciation, fast responses, long conversations. And while these things can certainly be part of fluency, they are not always what makes someone feel fluent. Imagine standing in a forest during a storm. The wind becomes stronger. The rain begins to fall. Branches move in every direction. Some trees bend dramatically. Others seem surprisingly calm. At first, it might seem as though the calm trees are stronger. But perhaps strength is not the best word. Perhaps they are simply rooted more deeply. The storm reaches every tree. The wind reaches every tree. The rain reaches every tree. Yet some remain steady, not because they avoid difficulty, but because they have spent years growing roots beneath the surface. Perhaps language learning works in the same way. Most people see the branches, the words, the grammar, the pronunciation, the visible parts of fluency, but true comfort often comes from the roots. Thousands of conversations, hundreds of mistakes, years of listening, years of reading, years of showing up, even on days when progress felt invisible. The roots are rarely exciting. No one takes pictures of roots. No one admires roots. Yet the roots are what allow the tree to stand calmly when the wind arrives. Maybe you've experienced this before. Most people have. Perhaps there was a time when speaking English felt frightening. You worried before every conversation. You rehearsed sentences in your head. You searched for the perfect words. You hoped not to make mistakes. And if a mistake happened, you remembered it for hours, sometimes for days. There is nothing unusual about this. We all struggle with uncertainty from time to time, especially when we care deeply about something. But over time, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. The same way the roots of a tree grow. Conversation after conversation, your relationship with English begins to shift. A mistake happens. You continue speaking. A word disappears. You find another way to explain it. A sentence feels awkward. The conversation still moves forward. Little by little, you begin learning something important. Communication is stronger than perfection. Imagine walking across a wooden bridge. The first time feels different. You look at every step. You notice every sound. You wonder if the bridge is strong enough. You wonder if you are strong enough. But after crossing the same bridge many times, the experience changes. The bridge has not changed. You have. Trust has appeared, and trust changes everything. Perhaps one of the most beautiful moments in language learning is the moment trust begins to replace fear. Not complete trust, not perfect trust, just enough. Enough to speak, enough to try, enough to continue. Life often moves forward in this way, not through giant breakthroughs, but through small moments repeated many times. Imagine watching the sunrise. You never see the exact moment darkness becomes light. The change is too gradual, too quiet. Yet somehow, morning always arrives. Fluency often develops in the same way. Many learners wait for a dramatic moment, a day when everything suddenly feels easy, a day when they finally feel fluent. But most people discover something different. The transformation happens so slowly that it can only be seen by looking back. One day, you understand a podcast more easily. Another day, you tell a story with less effort. Another day, you realize you haven't translated a sentence in several minutes. Each moment seems small, but together, they create something remarkable. A new relationship with the language. Perhaps that relationship is what people are really noticing when they describe someone as fluent. Not the vocabulary, not the grammar, not even the pronunciation. The comfort, the ease, the quiet confidence. Imagine sitting beside someone who speaks calmly. They do not rush. They do not try to impress. They do not panic when searching for a word. They simply continue. There is something reassuring about that, something human, something beautiful. And perhaps that beauty has very little to do with English itself. Perhaps it comes from acceptance. Acceptance that mistakes are part of communication. Acceptance that growth takes time. Acceptance that fluency is not a performance. It is a relationship built slowly, patiently. One conversation at a time. Many people spend years trying to sound fluent. Fewer spend time learning how to feel comfortable. Yet comfort may be the deeper goal. Because when comfort appears, something else begins to appear as well. Presence. You stop focusing so much on yourself and begin focusing on the conversation, the person, the idea, the story being shared. The language moves quietly into the background. Like a window, you no longer stare at the glass. You look through it. Perhaps that is why fluent speakers often seem relaxed. They are not carrying English on their shoulders anymore. The language has become part of the journey itself, like walking on a familiar path, like sitting in a familiar chair, like returning to a place that feels like home. And that leads us to an important question. If the deepest beauty of fluency is not found in perfect English, but in comfort, trust, and presence, then what does fluency ultimately give us? What becomes possible when the language finally stops demanding attention and starts quietly supporting our lives? And perhaps that is where the quiet beauty becomes most visible. Not when someone compliments your English, not when you learn a difficult word, not when you achieve a test score, but in the small moments that quietly become part of everyday life. Imagine carrying a lantern through the darkness. At first, the lantern demands attention. You protect the flame. You watch the light. You worry about the wind. The lantern feels important because without it, you cannot see the path. But as the journey continues, something changes. Your attention slowly moves away from the lantern. You begin noticing the road, the trees, the stars above, the people walking beside you. The lantern is still there, still important, still helping, but it is no longer the center of your attention. Perhaps fluency works the same way. At first, English feels like the lantern. Everything revolves around it. Every conversation, every mistake, every new word, every grammar rule. The language sits at the center of your attention. But eventually, something shifts. The language moves into the background, and life moves forward. Maybe you've experienced a glimpse of this already. Most people have. Perhaps you were watching a video in English, and suddenly, you forgot you were listening in English. You became interested in the story, the idea, the emotion. For a few moments, the language disappeared, not because it was gone, but because it had become transparent, like a window. You stopped looking at it and began looking through it. There is something beautiful about that, because the purpose of a window is not the glass. The purpose is the view beyond it. And perhaps the purpose of language has never been language itself. Perhaps it has always been connection. A story shared, a friendship formed, an idea understood, a moment experienced, a life expanded. Imagine meeting someone from another country. At first, the conversation may feel simple. A few questions, a few answers, nothing extraordinary. Yet somehow, two people from completely different worlds begin understanding one another. A bridge appears where no bridge existed before. Perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts of language. Not perfection, connection. Not performance, understanding, not impressing people, reaching people. Life has a way of reminding us of this truth, again and again. The most meaningful conversations are rarely the most perfect ones. Sometimes a conversation contains pauses. Sometimes words are missing. Sometimes grammar is imperfect. And yet, the connection remains. The meaning remains. The human experience remains. Maybe that is why fluent speakers often seem peaceful. They have stopped trying to control every detail. They have stopped demanding perfection from themselves. They have learned something many learners spend years discovering. Communication is not a test. It is a relationship. Imagine sitting beside a river. The water moves quietly around every obstacle. A rock appears. The river continues. A fallen branch appears. The river continues. The path changes. The river continues. Not because the obstacles disappear, but because the river understands its purpose. The purpose is not to avoid every obstacle. The purpose is to keep flowing. Perhaps fluent speakers do the same. A forgotten word appears. They continue. A mistake happens. They continue. An awkward sentence appears. They continue. The conversation remains alive. The connection remains alive. And maybe that is what fluency truly feels like. Not perfect control, but steady movement. Not certainty, but trust. Not the absence of mistakes, but the absence of fear. Many people begin learning English because they want something, a better opportunity, a better career, the ability to travel, the ability to communicate. These are wonderful goals. But perhaps along the way, something unexpected happens. The language begins giving something back, a larger world, new perspectives, new friendships, new stories, new possibilities, a new way of seeing life. And perhaps that is the reward hidden beneath years of practice. Not simply better English, a bigger life. Imagine standing at the edge of a hill. Below you are paths you never noticed before, places you could not previously reach, people you could not previously understand, experiences that once felt distant. The world itself has not changed, but your ability to move through it has. Language does that, quietly, patiently, one conversation at a time, one story at a time, one day at a time. And perhaps that is why the beauty of fluency is so often overlooked, because it arrives quietly, without applause, without announcement, without a dramatic finish line. One day, you simply realize something. English no longer feels heavy. It no longer feels intimidating. It no longer feels like a constant challenge. It feels familiar, comfortable, natural, like an old friend. Like a favorite path, like a place you know by heart. And when that happens, something else becomes possible. You stop focusing on the language and start focusing on life, the books you want to read, the conversations you want to have, the ideas you want to explore, the people you want to understand. The language becomes a companion, not a destination, a bridge, not a barrier, a source of freedom, not pressure. Perhaps that is the quiet beauty of fluency. Not that it makes you sound impressive, not that it makes you perfect, but that it becomes so natural. You almost forget it is there, like sunlight entering a room, like a familiar road beneath your feet, like breathing, quiet, steady, natural. And maybe that is the lesson hidden inside this story. Fluency is not a performance. It is not a race. It is not something you force. It is something you grow into, patiently, gently, one conversation at a time, until eventually, the language no longer stands between you and the world. It simply helps you experience more of it. So if you remember one thing from this story, remember this: the most beautiful part of fluency is not how much English you know. It is how little you need to think about it. Because when the language finally becomes quiet, your life becomes louder. Thank you for spending this time with me, and see you in the next story.